The morning sun had barely peeked over the horizon when Sarah Matthews pulled into the cracked parking lot of the Blue Plate Diner. The neon sign flickered weakly against the dawn sky, just as it had every morning for the past 6 years of her life. But today felt different. Today, Sarah had made a decision that would change everything. At 32, Sarah wasn't just any waitress. She was the kind of server who remembered that Mr. Peterson needed his coffee with exactly 2 ice cubes, or that little Amy Thompson was allergic to strawberries. Her regulars didn't just come for the diner's famous blueberry pancakes, they came because Sarah made them feel like family. Living in the small town of Millbrook, Pennsylvania, hadn't always been easy for her. As a single mother of 2 young boys, Jason, 8, and Tommy, 6, every dollar counted. The tips she earned at the Blue Plate Diner barely covered the rent of their modest 2-bedroom apartment above the local hardware store, but Sarah never complained. She took pride in her work and in setting a good example for her sons. That morning, as she got ready for her 6 a.m. shift, Sarah stood before her bathroom mirror, adjusting her uniform, the standard blue dress with a white apron that all Blue Plate servers wore. But today, there was one addition to her outfit. Sitting on the counter was a bright red cap with 4 simple words that had become anything but simple in recent years. "Mom, are you really going to wear that to work?" Jason asked from the doorway, his school bag already slung over his shoulder. He was staying with Mrs. Rodriguez, their elderly neighbor, until it was time for school. Sarah picked up the MAGA cap and carefully placed it on her head. "Sometimes, honey, you have to stand up for what you believe in," she said, though her voice trembled slightly. She knew the diner had strict rules about uniforms, but something inside her had snapped after last night's town hall meeting where she felt her voice didn't matter. The drive to work was filled with the usual morning radio chatter and the gentle humming of her old Toyota's engine. Sarah rehearsed different explanations in her head, trying to find the right words to explain her choice to her manager, Linda Thompson. Linda had always been fair, if a bit rigid about rules. As Sarah walked through the back entrance of the diner at 5:45 a.m., the familiar smells of coffee and bacon greeted her. Carl, the cook who worked there even longer than she had, was already firing up the grill. He did a double take when he saw her cap but said nothing, just nodded and turned back to his preparations. "Morning, Carl," Sarah said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. She could hear her heart pounding in her ears as she tied her apron strings. The first few regular customers started trickling in as the clock struck 6. Old Mr. Wilson, who always arrived precisely at opening time, paused mid-step when he saw Sarah's cap. His eyebrows rose slightly, but he took his usual seat at the counter without comment. Sarah poured his coffee, black, no sugar, with the same warm smile she always had. By 6:30 a.m., the diner was filling up with the usual morning crowd. Some customers openly stared at the cap, while others pointedly avoided looking at it. Sarah could hear whispers at table 7, where the morning coffee group of retired teachers usually sat. Mrs. Henderson, who had been coming to the diner for decades, picked up her purse and left without ordering her usual English muffin. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with one of Carl's spatulas. Sarah kept working, taking orders, refilling coffee cups, and delivering plates of steaming breakfast foods. Her hands shook slightly as she wrote down orders, but her smile never wavered. She had always believed that good service meant treating everyone with respect, regardless of their beliefs. At 7:15 a.m., Linda Thompson's silver Subaru pulled into the parking lot. Sarah watched through the large front windows as her manager stepped out of the car, straightened her blazer, and walked toward the entrance. The little bell above the door chimed as Linda walked in, and the entire diner seemed to hold its breath. Sarah stood behind the counter, order pad in hand, knowing that the next few minutes would change the course of her life. She had no idea just how right she was. Linda Thompson's heels clicked sharply against the diner's worn linoleum floor as she made her way to the counter. Her face was a mask of professional calm, but her eyes fixed on Sarah's red cap like a laser beam. The morning regulars pretended to focus on their breakfast plates, but everyone was watching from the corners of their eyes. "Sarah, can I see you in my office?" Linda's voice was quiet but firm. She didn't wait for an answer, already turning toward the small room near the kitchen that served as the manager's office. Sarah's hands trembled as she handed her orders to Carl through the kitchen window. "Can you cover my tables for a few minutes, Jenny?" she asked her coworker, who nodded silently, concern visible on her young face. The manager's office was barely bigger than a closet, with just enough room for a desk, 2 chairs, and a filing cabinet that had seen better days. The walls were covered with health department certificates and employee schedules. Linda sat behind her desk, gesturing for Sarah to take the other seat. "I've been your manager for 4 years, Sarah," Linda began, folding her hands on the desk. "You're one of our best servers. Your customers love you. But you know our dress code policy." She pulled out the employee handbook from her desk drawer, flipping it open to a market page. Sarah sat up straighter, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I know the policy, Linda. This is about more than just a hat. It's about being able to express who I am, just like Jenny can wear her rainbow pin, or how Carl has his Yankees cap in the kitchen." Linda's expression hardened slightly. "Those are approved exceptions, Sarah. Jenny's pin was cleared by corporate as part of our diversity initiative, and Carl's cap is part of the kitchen uniform. Your political statement isn't the same thing. So some statements are okay, but others aren't." Sarah could feel heat rising in her cheeks. She thought about her boys at home, about the lessons she taught them about standing up for their beliefs. "This isn't a debate about free speech," Linda replied, her tone growing firmer. "This is a private business with clear policies. I need you to remove the cap and return to work. Consider this your first and only warning." Sarah's hands went to the cap, fingers touching the brim. For a moment, she considered taking it off. She thought about her rent payment due next week, about Jason's upcoming school field trip she still needed to pay for, about Tommy's asthma medication. But then she remembered the town hall meeting last night, where people like her had been dismissed and mocked. She thought about all the times she'd stayed quiet to keep the peace, to not make waves. "I'm sorry, Linda, but I can't do that," Sarah said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Linda sighed heavily, opening another drawer and pulling out a different form. "Then you leave me no choice, Sarah. This is your termination notice. You've refused to comply with company dress code after a direct warning. I need you to sign here and then collect your things." The paper seemed to blur before Sarah's eyes as she stared at it. 6 years of service, hundreds of familiar faces, thousands of coffee refills and friendly conversations, all ending because of a hat. Her hand shook as she signed the paper. "Your final check will be mailed to you," Linda said, her voice softer now. "And I'll be happy to provide a reference for your next job. You're a good worker, Sarah. I wish you hadn't forced my hand." Sarah stood up slowly, feeling like she was moving through a dream. She untied her apron and folded it carefully, placing it on Linda's desk. Without a word, she walked out of the office, past the curious stares of her coworkers and customers, and through the front door. The little bell chimed behind her, somehow sounding sadder than usual. In her car, Sarah finally let the tears fall. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands, opened her social media app, and began to type. She had no way of knowing that her next post would catch the attention of someone who would change everything. Sarah's social media post was simple and straightforward. She wrote about her 6 years at the Blue Plate Diner, her love for her customers, and how she was fired for wearing an MAGA cap to work. She added a photo of herself in her car, tears still visible on her cheeks, the red cap clearly visible. Then she pressed post and drove home, expecting only her friends to see it. She was wrong. By the time Sarah picked up her boys from Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment that afternoon, her post had been shared over 10,000 times. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing with notifications, and she had missed calls from 3 different local news stations. The story was spreading like wildfire through Millbrook and beyond. "Mommy, why are there people with cameras outside?" Tommy asked as they walked up to their apartment. Sarah held her son's hands tighter, hurrying them past the small group of reporters who had somehow found her address. Inside their apartment, Sarah sat at their small kitchen table, staring at her phone in disbelief. The local Facebook groups were exploding with activity. People she had served breakfast to for years were arguing in the comments. Some defended her right to wear the cap, while others supported the diner's decision. The Blue Plate Diner's social media pages were flooded with both negative and positive reviews. "Mrs. Matthews?" A gentle knock at the door made her jump. It was Mrs. Rodriguez, holding a casserole dish. "I made you dinner, and you might want to see this." She handed Sarah a tablet open to the local news website. The headline read, Local Waitress Asparakas National DBAT. Freedom of expression versus workplace rules. Below it was Sarah's photo, already viewed by hundreds of thousands of people. The article mentioned similar cases across the country and quoted employment lawyers discussing workplace dress codes and personal expression rights. Sarah's phone rang again. This time it was her sister Karen, calling from Ohio. "Sarah, you're trending. Have you checked Twitter? People are organizing a protest outside the diner tomorrow." A protest? Sarah felt her stomach twist. She hadn't wanted this kind of attention. She looked at Jason and Tommy, who were doing their homework at the coffee table, trying to ignore the occasional camera flashes from outside their window. The next morning, Millbrook's usually quiet Main Street was anything but peaceful. Two groups had gathered outside the Blue Plate Diner, one supporting Sarah, the other backing the restaurant's decision. Local police had to station officers to keep the groups separated. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching into the gray morning sky. Inside her apartment, Sarah watched the scene unfold on her TV. The local news was interviewing people from both sides. She recognized Mrs. Henderson from the morning coffee group, speaking passionately about keeping politics out of restaurants. Then they showed Carl, the cook, defending Sarah's character while on his break. "She's the best server we ever had," Carl said, his usually quiet voice firm. Politics aside, she treated everyone with respect. Always has. Sarah's phone lit up with a text from Jenny, her former coworker. "Business is down 50% today. Half the regulars are boycotting, the other half can't get in because of the protests." "Linda looks terrible." The story continued to grow. By evening, national news outlets had picked it up. Conservative websites portrayed Sarah as a victim of cancel culture, while liberal sites defended the diner's right to enforce dress codes. Sarah's inbox filled with messages from strangers across the country, some offering support and even money, others sending angry words she tried not to read. That night, after putting the boys to bed, Sarah sat alone in her small living room. The protesters had finally gone home, and the street was quiet again. She held her red cap in her hands, running her fingers over the stitching. Her post had now been shared over 1 million times, and a fundraising page someone set up for her was approaching $50,000. She was about to turn off her phone and try to sleep when a new notification popped up. The message was from a private account, but the name made her heart stop. "Barron Trump would like to connect with you." Barron Trump sat in his private study at his New York apartment, scrolling through his phone when Sarah's story caught his eye. At 23, the youngest Trump had deliberately stayed away from politics, focusing instead on his business studies and technology interests. But something about this story made him pause. He watched the video of Sarah's interview with a local news station, noting how she spoke about her customers with genuine warmth, regardless of their political views. Unlike many viral political stories, there was no anger in her voice, just sadness at losing the job she loved. "James," Barron called to his personal assistant, who was working in the adjacent room. "Can you find out more about this Sarah Matthews case in Pennsylvania?" He forwarded the link to James's phone. While waiting for information, Barron reflected on his own experiences with political symbols. Growing up in the spotlight, he had learned early on how a simple item like a hat could divide people. He remembered the school days when classmates would judge him based solely on his last name, before even knowing him as a person. An hour later, James returned with a detailed report. Sarah Matthews, age 32, single mother of 2 boys. 6-year employment history at the Blue Plate Diner with excellent performance reviews. Active in community service, she volunteers at the local food bank twice a month. No criminal record, pays her taxes on time, and has a reputation for treating all customers equally. Barron leaned back in his chair, thinking, what about customer reviews from before this incident? James pulled up his tablet. Consistently positive. Here's one from 3 months ago. "Sarah remembered my wife's dietary restrictions from 6 months ago. She's the reason we keep coming back." Another says, "Best service in town. Doesn't matter if you're wearing a suit or work clothes." And the diner's dress code policy. It exists, but seems inconsistently enforced. Other employees wear personal items, religious symbols, sports team gear, awareness ribbons. The policy appears to be selectively applied in this case. Barron stood up and walked to his window, looking out over the New York skyline. He had spent years studying business ethics and workplace dynamics, trying to understand how to bridge divisions rather than deepen them. This situation presented an opportunity to make a difference without making it political. Send her a message, he decided. But James, make it clear this isn't about politics. It's about fair treatment and professional experience. James drafted the message, and Barron reviewed it carefully before approving it. They decided to reach out through a private social media account that Barron used for business networking. The message was simple and professional. Dear Ms. Matthews, I've been following your story and would like to help in a constructive way. This isn't about political statements. It's about your 6 years of excellent customer service and professional experience. Would you be willing to have a conversation? Barron Trump. After sending the message, Barron made several calls to his contacts in the restaurant industry. He had been building his own network, separate from his family's businesses, focusing on hospitality and customer service innovations. One call was to Michael Chen, owner of the prestigious Renaissance Restaurant Group, which operated several high-end establishments in Pennsylvania. Michael, remember when we discussed finding people who understand true customer service? Barron said into the phone. I think I found someone worth considering. As Barron waited for Sarah's response, he prepared a plan. This wasn't about making a political statement or grabbing headlines. It was about helping someone who had demonstrated real professional values, treating everyone with respect and dignity, regardless of their beliefs. His phone buzzed with a notification. Sarah had responded. Mr. Trump, thank you for reaching out. I want to be clear, I'm not looking to make this more political than it already is. I just want to work and support my boys. Barron smiled. Her response confirmed what he had thought. This was someone who understood what really mattered. He began typing his reply, knowing that this conversation could change not just Sarah's life, but perhaps show others a way to move past political divisions in the workplace. Over the next few days, Barron Trump and his team quietly conducted a thorough investigation into Sarah Matthews' background, not to find problems, but to understand the full picture of who she was as a person and professional. What they discovered impressed them more than they expected. Sarah's story went far beyond her 6 years at the Blue Plate Diner. James, Barron's assistant, compiled a detailed report from interviews with local community members. Mrs. Rodriguez, Sarah's elderly neighbor, spoke about how Sarah helped her with groceries every Sunday, refusing to accept any payment. She even brings me soup when I'm sick, and her boys make me birthday cards, the old woman had said, tears in her eyes. At the local food bank, volunteer coordinator Mark Thompson shared stories about Sarah's dedication. Even when she was exhausted from double shifts, she would come here twice a month to help sort donations. She always brought her boys too, teaching them about giving back to the community. Barron was particularly moved by a letter from Tommy's teacher, describing how Sarah worked extra shifts to buy supplies for other children in her son's class who couldn't afford them. She had done this quietly, never wanting recognition or praise. The investigation also revealed Sarah's professional dedication. Former coworkers spoke about her creating a system to help new servers remember regular customers' preferences. She had maintained a small notebook with details about customers' allergies, birthdays, and dietary restrictions, going far beyond what her job required. I still use Sarah's training notes, Jenny, her former colleague, told James during a phone interview. She taught me that success in this job isn't just about taking orders, it's about making people feel valued. Barron sat in his office, reviewing customer comment cards from the diner that James had obtained. One caught his eye. Sarah remembered that my wife passed away last month and gave me a free piece of apple pie, my wife's favorite. She said it was from the regulars. That simple act of kindness meant everything to me. The financial records showed something interesting too. Despite struggling to make ends meet, Sarah had never taken money from the diner's mistake fund, a common practice where servers could be compensated for orders they got wrong. Instead, she had often paid for mistakes from her own tips. Mr. Trump, James said, entering the office with another report. I found something else. Remember the fundraising page set up for her? She's redirected half the donations to a local children's hospital. She only kept enough to cover her basic expenses until she finds new work. Barron nodded, not surprised by this discovery. He pulled up Sarah's response to his initial message on his computer screen. They had exchanged several messages over the past few days, and each one confirmed what his investigation had shown. Sarah was someone who put others first. In their latest exchange, she had written, "I appreciate all the attention my story has gotten, but I'm worried about the division it's causing in our town. The diner is losing business, and that affects everyone who works there. They're good people who don't deserve this." Barron reached for his phone and called Michael Chen of the Renaissance Restaurant Group again. "Michael, remember what you said about wanting to change the culture of fine dining, about making high-end restaurants more welcoming to everyone?" "Of course," Michael replied. "It's been our biggest challenge." "Why?" "I think I found someone who could help. She has a natural gift for making everyone feel special, regardless of who they are or what they believe. And she does something most fine dining servers don't: genuine humility and a pure service heart." As Barron hung up the phone, he looked at the wall of his office where he kept his favorite quote: "The true measure of a person is how they treat others when no one is watching." Sarah Matthews, he realized, was the living embodiment of these words. He turned to James, set up a meeting. It's time to change this story from one about division to one about opportunity. What Barron didn't know was that his next conversation with Sarah would exceed even his highest expectations. The Renaissance Hotel's private dining room felt worlds away from the Blue Plate diner. Sarah Matthews sat nervously in a high-backed leather chair, wearing the navy blue dress she had bought for Jason's school conferences. Her hands fidgeted with the strap of her purse, which she had carefully selected to hide its worn edges. Barron Trump sat across from her, his manner warm and professional. Next to him was Michael Chen, owner of the Renaissance Restaurant Group, one of Pennsylvania's most successful hospitality companies. The wall-to-wall windows offered a stunning view of the city, but Sarah's attention was focused entirely on the conversation at hand. "Ms. Matthews," Barron began, his voice gentle, "thank you for meeting with us today. We've been looking at your work history, your community involvement, and most importantly, the impact you've had on people's lives." Sarah straightened in her chair. "Mr. Trump, I want to be clear. I'm not looking for publicity or to make any political statements. I just want to work and take care of my boys." Michael Chen smiled, exchanging a knowing look with Barron. "That's exactly why we're here, Ms. Matthews. This isn't about politics at all. It's about something much more valuable: genuine hospitality." Barron opened a folder on the table. "In the past week, we've talked to dozens of your former customers. Would you like to know what they remember most about you?" He pulled out a stack of papers. Not one person mentioned your political views. Instead, they talked about how you remembered their children's names, their food allergies, their wedding anniversaries. Sarah's eyes welled with tears. "Those people weren't just customers to me. They were part of my daily life for 6 years." Michael leaned forward. "That's exactly what we're looking for. The Renaissance Group is launching a new initiative to change how fine dining works. We want to combine high-end service with genuine warmth, something that's rare in our industry." "But I've never worked in fine dining," Sarah protested. "I know burgers and breakfast specials, not fancy wine lists and gourmet meals." Barron smiled. "Food service skills can be taught. What can't be taught is genuine care for others. We've seen how you've used half of your donation money to help the Children's Hospital, how you buy school supplies for kids who can't afford them, how you help your elderly neighbor with her groceries. Those are just normal things that people should do," Sarah said quietly. "Exactly," Michael responded enthusiastically. "That's what makes you perfect for this position. We're offering you a role as senior server at our flagship restaurant, the Renaissance Grand. Full benefits, including health insurance for your boys. Salary that's twice what you made at the diner, plus tips." Sarah's hands trembled. What about dress codes? I don't want to cause any more problems." Barron pulled out another document. "We have clear, written policies that apply equally to everyone. No political symbols of any kind during work hours, from any party or belief system, but also no discrimination against employees for their beliefs outside of work. Fair, clear, and consistent." "We're not just offering you a job," Michael added. "We want you to help train our other servers. Share your approach to customer service. Help us create an environment where everyone feels welcomed and valued, regardless of their background." Sarah looked out the window at the city below, thinking about her boys, about their future. Then she thought about all her regular customers at the diner, how they had become like family. Could I still volunteer at the food bank? Both men smiled. We'll work your schedule around it, Michael assured her. In fact, we'd like to establish a corporate partnership with the food bank. Your community involvement is part of why we want you on our team. For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt hope rising in her chest. This wasn't about winning or losing a political battle. It wasn't about proving a point. It was about taking her natural talents and using them to make an even bigger difference in people's lives. When can I start? She asked, her voice steady and clear. Sarah's first day at the Renaissance Grand felt like stepping into a different world. The marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and the uniform, a crisp black shirt and tailored pants, felt strange after years in her blue diner dress. But her nervousness disappeared the moment she started interacting with guests. During her training week, Sarah surprised everyone with how quickly she adapted. While other servers struggled to memorize the extensive wine list and complex menu items, she created a simple system to help the entire staff learn. Her method of organizing information about regular customers' preferences was so effective that Michael Chen decided to implement it across all their restaurants. Watch how Sarah handles table 12, Michael whispered to Barron, who had come to check on her progress. They observed as Sarah gracefully helped an elderly couple who seemed overwhelmed by the fancy menu. The chicken here reminds me a bit of the comfort food my grandmother used to make, she told them warmly. And if you'd like, I can ask the chef to modify any dish to suit your tastes. The couple relaxed visibly, their anxiety melting away under her genuine care. Word spread quickly about the new server who brought small-town warmth to fine dining. Regular customers at the Renaissance Grand, who were used to polite but distant service, found themselves sharing stories with Sarah about their families, their celebrations, and even their struggles. One evening, a group of businessmen came in, one of them wearing a political button opposing Sarah's beliefs. Some staff members tensed up, remembering her story, but Sarah served them with the same warm attention she gave everyone else. That was a test, Michael later told her. Those were friends of mine. They reported back that they received the best service they'd ever had. You passed with flying colors. Sarah's influence extended beyond customer service. During her breaks, she taught newer servers her techniques. It's not about memorizing orders, she explained. It's about connecting with people. Everyone who walks through that door has a story. Our job is to make them feel heard and valued. The changes were noticed. Restaurant reviews started mentioning the surprisingly warm atmosphere and personalized attention at what had previously been known as a somewhat stuffy establishment. Reservation requests increased, with many specifically asking to be seated in Sarah's section. At home, the changes were even more apparent. Sarah could now afford a better apartment in a safer neighborhood. Jason and Tommy each had their own room, decorated with posters of their choosing. The constant worry about making ends meet had lifted, replaced by a sense of security and pride. One morning, as Sarah helped Mrs. Rodriguez move into the apartment next door, she'd insisted on having her favorite neighbor come with her. The elderly woman noticed something. Sarah, whatever happened to that red cat that started all this? She asked curiously. Sarah smiled, realizing she hadn't thought about it in weeks. It's in a box somewhere. You know what's funny? I've learned that making people feel welcome and respected is more important than any symbol or statement. The local news, which had once focused on the controversy, now ran a different kind of story about Sarah. They covered her community initiative, where the Renaissance Group partnered with the food bank to serve gourmet meals to homeless families once a month. The article didn't mention politics at all. Back at the restaurant, Sarah was training a new group of servers. Among them was Jenny, her former co-worker from the Blue Plate Diner, who had been hired on Sarah's recommendation. Remember, Sarah told the group, every guest who walks through that door is leaving their world behind and entering ours. Our job is to make this moment special for them, no matter who they are or what they believe. As she finished the training session, Sarah noticed Barron Trump watching from the doorway, a proud smile on his face. He gave her a small nod, acknowledging how far she'd come from that morning when a simple cap had seemed to end her career. That evening, as Sarah served her tables, she realized that sometimes losing what you think you're fighting for leads you to something bigger than you ever imagined. 1 year had passed since the day Sarah Matthews had walked out of the Blue Plate Diner. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the Renaissance Grand as she prepared for a special event. the restaurant's annual community breakfast, where fine dining met small-town hospitality. Sarah stood in the elegant dining room, adjusting the fresh flowers on each table. Her black uniform now felt as natural as her old blue dress once had. At her suggestion, the restaurant had invited several former Blue Plate Diner regulars to this event, alongside their usual upscale clientele. "Are you ready?" Michael Chen asked, appearing beside her. "This is your project, after all." Sarah nodded, thinking back to how far she'd come. Her idea to bridge the gap between fine dining and community service had grown into something remarkable. Today, people from all walks of life would sit together, sharing a meal and conversation. The first guests began arriving. Mr. Wilson, our old regular from the diner, walked in wearing his best suit, looking slightly nervous until he saw Sarah's familiar smile. She led him to a table where a local business executive was already seated. Within minutes, they were chatting like old friends. Linda Thompson, her former manager from the Blue Plate Diner, came in next. There was a moment of tension until Sarah walked over and warmly welcomed her. "I saved you a special seat," she said, leading Linda to a table where Mrs. Rodriguez was sitting with one of the city's prominent lawyers. As the room filled, something magical happened. Construction workers sat next to bank presidents. Teachers shared tables with tech entrepreneurs. The usual barriers of social status and political beliefs melted away over perfectly prepared omelettes and artisanal coffee. Barron Trump, who had flown in specifically for this event, watched from a corner table. "Your idea is working better than we imagined," he told Sarah during a quiet moment. "We're planning to implement this community breakfast program in all our restaurants across the country." Sarah's boys, Jason and Tommy, now helped out at these events, proudly wearing junior server aprons as they'd offered juice and coffee to guests. They had learned valuable lessons about treating everyone with equal respect and dignity. Later that morning, something unexpected happened. A guest asked Sarah about the incident that had led to all this. The room grew quiet, everyone curious about her response. Sarah smiled thoughtfully. "Sometimes life's biggest challenges lead to unexpected blessings," she said. "I learned that what you wear matters less than how you treat people. Every person who walks through these doors deserves to feel valued and respected." She glanced at her sons, who were carefully carrying a tray of pastries together. "Most importantly, I learned that the best way to teach our children about respect and understanding isn't through symbols or statements, but through actions and examples." As the event wound down, Michael Chen made an announcement that brought tears to Sarah's eyes. The Renaissance Restaurant Group was establishing a scholarship program for single parents pursuing careers in hospitality management. The first scholarship would be named after Sarah. "Your story taught us something important," Michael said. "True hospitality isn't about politics or status, it's about making everyone feel welcome." Sarah Matthews didn't just adapt to fine dining, she helped us redefine it. That evening, after the last guest had left and the tables were cleared, Sarah found herself alone in the dining room. She walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. In her purse was a promotion letter, Regional Director of Customer Experience for the entire restaurant group. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jenny. "The Blue Plate Diner is closing down. The owner is retiring." Sarah felt a momentary pang of sadness, but then an idea began to form. Perhaps this was another opportunity to bring people together. She opened her phone's notes app and began typing, "Proposal. Community-style fine dining concept for former Blue Plate Diner location." Some dreams, she had learned, come true in unexpected ways. As she gathered her things to head home, Sarah passed the restaurant's mission statement, which now included words she had helped write. "Where every guest is a VIP, and every meal is an opportunity to bring people together." The red cap that had started it all remained in its box, a reminder that sometimes losing your job can lead to finding your true calling.